What's up, guys? It's Eventon here, and this is actually part 2 of my guide when it comes to fitting your Amarrian industrial hauling ships. And so the last video I did was the T1 versions for both the Bestower and the Sigil. I'll be sure to put that in the description below, or maybe in the top right, I'll put a little link that you guys can click on to check out that video first. But this video, we are actually going to be covering 2 ships here, which is the T2 version. So we're going to be doing the Impel as well as the Prorator. I will be going a little bit faster in this video when it comes to covering the fits as well as some other stuff, because if you guys are looking at T2 ships, I'm assuming you've already been hauling for a while, so I'm not going to go too in depth with some of these things. But the Impel is the deep space transport and the Prorator is the Blockade runner. So the main difference between these is the Impel is almost like a mini freighter in a way. It has a ton of hit points. The 3 things that stick out to me is starting from the bottom going up is that you get a 100% bonus to overheating your afterburners, microwarpdrives, resistance modules, all that kind of stuff, which is pretty cool. The +2 warp core strength, so it's very similar to the Venture. This is actually able to shake off normal scrams, but if they use a faction scram, you're going to have to add another warp core stabilizer to kind of balance that out. So it's very hard to lock these types of ships down. But if you look up here for transport ships, for every level that you put into here, you actually get fleet hangar capacity. So by default, these ships actually get a let's see if we can go down here towards the bottom, a fleet hangar capacity. So this is where actually all of your hauling is going to go through, not your cargo cargo hold. You can haul some stuff in your cargo hold, but it's very small. But at the start you have 50, and if you end up maxing this out, it goes up to 62,500 meters cubed in cargo that you're able to haul in the fleet hangar. And the deep space transport is interesting because for all the empires, that they have the exact same fleet hangar capacity. Normally, the Amarrians have the highest cargo capacity when it comes to all of their ships. Like if you just load it up with a bunch of cargo expanders, the Amarrians have the highest cargo capacity. But because it's even, I would say for the deep space transport, there are some ships that are, in my opinion, objectively better, but that's probably going to be for another video. The Prorator is a great ship because A, they usually have a really fast warp speed, so you're able to get from A to B really quickly. You're immune to cargo scanners, so if someone is trying to scan your ship, it's just going to come out blank, so they're not sure what you're going to be hauling, which can be a good thing or a bad thing. Sometimes you can haul very expensive stuff and people have no idea. But on the other hand, you could get a group of gankers that are really bored, or a tornado that's really bored, and they just had enough. They've been there on a gate for 3 hours. They see a Prorator or another Blockade runner go through, and these things have pretty low health if you don't fit it correctly, and you could just get shot out of the air, and they're just not sure. So sometimes you can actually score pretty big by just shooting Blockade runners. But the main thing about the Blockade runner, and it's 100% its main defense, is that it can fit a covert ops cloaking device, which just means that you can actually activate your cloak and still enter warp at the same time and move around freely while you have your cloak on, which is a really, really cool feat. So we'll go ahead and jump into the fits. And so the first ship we're going to do is actually the Impel. And before we get into the fit, like I said before, my fits are not meant to be 100% cookie cutter. You guys can move some modules around, change it around as you see fit for your personal uses. But the reason why I have some different fits and stuff here is because the rules, because you're going to be taking some of these ships through null, so through low, especially through high sec. And the rules of engagement are very different between all of them, between null, low, and high. I mean, in high sec, typically you have 1, maybe 2 ships just trying to scram you and lock you down for the big group of guys to come gank you. Low sec, there's typically a lot of ships on the gate itself ready to jump on you and scram you. And then in null sec, of course, there's bubbles, and that's totally different. Now you need to get away from them and not so much try and enter warp as fast as you can like you can with low sec. So it's all very different. We'll go ahead and look at the fit here. The first one I'm actually going to go over is the low sec Impel, and probably the first thing that's sticking out to you is these low slots. Actually, we'll go ahead and like pretend like we're going through the gate. So the first thing you're going to do is, of course, try and do your cloak trick. You're going to, align, activate your cloak, turn on your microwarpdrive. But if somehow they end up finding a way to decloaking you, they bump into you, or they find a way to you mess up your cloak trick by either activating it too late or too early, they lock onto you. That's pretty much out the window. And at this point, now you need your second line of defense is basically your warp core stabilizer. So now they've decloaked you somehow, or you messed up the cloak, they locked onto you, and they're trying to scram you, disrupt you, whatever it is. If your warp strength is higher than their scram strength, you're still aligning and you're still trying to warp out. And with the scram strength of 6, because even though we only have 4 showing here, the deep space transport has 2 by default. So with the +6, it would actually have to take more than 2 people, or I should say more than 2 faction scrams in order to lock us down. So they would either need to have 2 faction scrams and 1 disruptor, or 3 faction scrams, or 2 T2 scrams, as well as some another faction scram. Like, they would have to actually throw a lot at you to be able to lock you down. And that's kind of the whole point of it, is that we want you to be able to stay in warp and keep going. If they still manage to find a way to lock you down, even after that, let's say they put 3 faction scrams on you, you want to start turning towards the gate and just start burning towards it as fast as you can, which is why we have the 100 MN Afterburner here. And the 2 prototype compact, you can't put the T2s because you just simply don't have enough space in the CPU in order to pull off like T2 versions. But I just did the kinetic and the thermal because that's probably like the most common delta damage when it comes to gankers using either hybrid or projectile weapons. And in the rig slots, we actually have 2 bulkheads. Normally, I would put armor in here. In the high sec fit, I actually do have 2 armor rigs, but instead we're using bulkheads because the armor ones actually reduce our speed, and I tend to prefer to hedge our bets towards, if we do somehow get locked down, we want to use every ounce of speed we can to get back to the gate instead of using armor. And now that's potentially a chance that we could actually end up dying, because at least in my opinion, I'd rather have the extra speed than the tiny bit of extra tank with the armor. So looking at the high sec impel now, there's a couple arguments. There's a few things that you can actually change about this by default. So of course, the first thing you're trying to do is the cloak trick. If that doesn't work, they lock onto you. It's actually pretty hard to gank a deep space transport in high sec because by default, they have that +2 warp core strength. So you would need someone to basically scram you in order to lock you down. And that's a faction scram too. So disruptors will not work because they only have a 1 point of 1 point strength. So they might prevent you from cloaking, but they can't really stop you from just turning on that microwarpdrive and entering warp within 10 seconds. So there is that point too as well. So if they end up locking onto you, they can't stop you from warping, but they can't stop you from cloaking as well. So there could be a small argument to be made, and it's very doubtful, that you could add 1 more warp core stabilizer down here for a +3, just in the random off chance there's a really prepared group of gankers in high sec that want to put a scram on you, like a faction scram, to like really lock you down. And at that point, you're really sitting duck. But I find that to be extremely rare. Down here, we do have a combination of thermal and kinetic and EM hardeners. And so the way I did it, and because again, there's the CPU is getting eaten up like really quickly between the Microwarpdrive and all of these, the way I spreaded it out, and I'll put the links, of course, down in the description of all, is I basically put 1 hardener for EM, 1 hardener for EM, 1 for explosive, and then 2 for thermal, 2 for kinetic. And the main reason for this, and I actually don't have a damage control because I did the math on this, and I would say 99% of ganks are done in ships with either projectile weapons or hybrid weapons. And most of the time it's hybrid weapons, but occasionally you do end up seeing tornadoes involved in ganks and things like that. So that's why I actually ended up maxing out these 3 damage types. So the thermal, the kinetic, as well as the explosive. And with this, and you're actually able to hedge out a bit more EHP with this than with the damage control. So if I took out the explosive or any of these 3 at all, we actually end up tanking less damage with that than the damage control, if that makes sense. So I put it through PyFA. I did a lot of research on this. I mean, I spent a couple hours on all these fits, looking them up online, putting them through PyFA, make sure it all made sense. You guys can test these fits yourself and put in a damage control if you guys want to see a difference. Go ahead and do that yourself if you want. But of course, with the deep space transports, if you end up blinging it and you were willing to really throw some ISK at this thing, this is just the bling fit. These are all basically just X-type explosive kinetic hardeners and the rest. At this point, now we're pushing nearly 200,000 EHP. So that's almost more than double than the high sec impel. So if you're willing to really throw some ISK at these ships, like, you can get some pretty absurd levels of tank. And especially if you get like a abyssal steel plates, like I had that before, if you end up wanting to do like abyssal Microwarpdrive, so it's easier to enter into warp, even if you do get decloaked or something like that. All those options are available. All right, and the next one we're going to cover is the Prorater. This ship, its pretty much only defense is the fact that it has a covert ops cloak. It doesn't have warp core bonuses like the deep space transport. It doesn't have a ton of extra armor or anything like that. All of its bonuses strictly just come from the fact that it can actually use a covert ops cloak. The first one we're going to look at is we're not going to look at the bait one. That's probably maybe for another video. We'll look at it real quick just for you guys. Just has a ton of armor. It's something that you obviously use with a group of friends to just bait people into attacking you. That's really the only thing. Looking now at the low sec and high sec Prorater, there's a lot of different schools of thought when it comes to the ship, and it's very, very flexible, all the way from the rigs to the low slots to the mid slots. This is what I would personally use in high sec or in low sec. So obviously you have the covert ops cloak. People say, oh, don't use shield extenders because it's going to blow up your signature radius. Honestly, that really shouldn't matter, because if you have a covert ops cloak, by the time you align, you should be hitting that cloak within a second, which essentially means if someone's trying to lock onto you and shoot you from far away, you essentially have a 1 second align time. Like, they should literally have less than 1 second to lock onto you, which is nearly impossible for every ship in the game unless they're getting an absurd amount of boost and lag is in their favor and all that kind of stuff. So essentially that should work. And if someone does end up bumping into you or whatever, I mean, you're already fair game, and the large shield extender isn't going to help you. So I like the large shield extender because you're going through low sec. Very rarely your cloak could drop as you're approaching the gate. You could have smart bombs dropped on you. Obviously pay attention in local as well as the overview. So if you do see smart bombs up ahead, I tend to just turn on the multispectral shield hardener as I'm approaching, just in case. And the rig slots, I just put double cargo hold optimizations, just because you'd rather have them and need them, and you'd rather have them and not need them than have them and not need them, or however that phrase goes. But regardless, the nice thing about the Prorater is that it actually has the maximum cargo hold. Like, if you filled up all of these with cargo hold optimization things, that actually has the most cargo hold of any of the Blockade runners in the game, which is pretty cool. The reason why I'm doing this fit is this is basically like the low sec one. It's really important that you try to get a 4 second, like a sub 4 second line time. You can get this below 3, but you're sacrificing a lot of space. And like I said, all this stuff is very modular. If you do end up getting caught or bumped, or if you do just mess up on the covert ops cloak, like you click it and remember it kind of gives you that warning like, hey, you can't activate your cloak while you're still cloaked or something like that. Sometimes it's just weird like that. And if you do get locked on with a disruptor, this will actually manage to be able to shake it off, and you're still entering warp within 4 seconds, which is still pretty darn quick. And of course, as you're removing these things, if you need the extra slots, of course, you just remove the nanofiber internal structure. Personally, I would actually remove the Accord thing, just because I want to keep that 4 second align. And then as we're going down, and eventually you can actually max this out at, I believe it's 13,000. So yeah, almost 14,000 meters cubed, which is actually a lot of space. And that's the most space you can actually fit in the Blockade runner in the game. But as you notice here, our align time is actually 6 seconds because it rounds up to the nearest second. So by the time we cloak and we start, by the time we align and cloak and we're entering warp, it's going to take us 6 seconds to do it. So that's actually quite a while. If you're going through low sec, that could give someone enough time to actually bump into you, which is why I recommend those nanofiber internal structures that go down here and give you a 4 second align time instead of basically a 6. Another thing you can do is, if you really wanted to, you can line up all of these low slots with warp core stabilizer, so you can basically shake off anything that hits you. But again, you're going to run into the same issue. You're going to have a 6 second align time, and if they just so happen to have enough stuff to lock you down, then you're pretty much SOL. But again, the whole point of this ship is that you're going to use the covert ops ship, or use the covert ops cloak. And that's your main line of defense, and then just try and get to align and get into warp as fast as you can, which is why I like the 4 second align version. All right, and now looking at the Null Sec version, and like I said before, the rules of engagement in Null Sec are very different. So let's say you take a gate, you want to cloak up and get away, just enter warp, but there's actually a bubble there. And usually that's how most people gank in Null Sec. There's not usually a bunch of ships sitting on the gate with like disruptors waiting to grab you. Most of the time they're really relying on the bubble to do most of the work, and then they still have tacklers coming after you. But it's not as bad as it is, or it's much worse than it when it comes to low sec. But regardless, when you're going through low sec, you almost always have to have a Microwarpdrive on your ship. So the cool thing about just cloaking in general, in case you guys didn't know, if you end up cloaking, whether you use the covert ops or the normal cloaking ship, once you click cloak, you actually have about 5 seconds to activate any other non-offensive module. So you can't activate any weapons, you can't activate an ECM or a target painter or anything like that, but you can activate things like multispectral shield hardeners, you can activate microwarpdrives, you can activate sensor boosters, I believe. You can activate armor hardeners. You can activate a lot of different stuff after you've activated cloak. So if you do end up in a bubble, what you want to do is first thing is obviously look around you, find an area that you could just get away from as fast as you can. So what you do, because the covert ops, you're running at maximum velocity anyway, you click cloak, and then as you're cloaked, you have about 5 seconds to turn on your microwarpdrive, and at that point, now you're going really fast. You're going about 2,150, which is why I put the T2 version, not a compact or anything like that. And the multispectral, again, is mostly for smart bombs that go in and out of Null Sec and stuff like that. With this fit, if we turn this off, actually, we're going to have a 3-second align time, which is the fastest you can possibly do in a blockade runner. As far as I know, there's no way you can actually get like below 2 seconds, but this is still pretty darn fast. So if there isn't a bubble, this is the best way to obviously just get away in general. But if there, because the second you get out of the bubble, I mean, you can still take your time getting away, but you want to be able to enter warp very quickly. If you do feel more comfortable, and actually in the rig slots, we have one cargo hold optimization too. And then I actually put in a low rig or a low friction nozzle joint just because I noticed I was really playing around with the low slots and trying to balance between using cargo expanders and some of the warp core stabilizers and things like that, and it just wasn't really working the way I liked. So there's a few things you can do if you really feel comfortable. If you need a cargo hold expander but you want to keep that sub 3-second line time, as you can see, we're really close to it, but it's still not enough. All you would do is add another inertial stabilizer, and now we're still sub 3-second line time, which is why I like having this low friction nozzle joint. Just pretend there's a cargo hold expander here. But again, you can just keep removing these. You know, you can add another cargo expander, another cargo hold expander. But once you remove this last one, you're actually about a 5-second line time, and that's pretty risky. So like I said before, all of these fits are not to be super cookie cutter fits or anything like that by any means, so you can't switch things out. Heck, even in my like high sec Prorator, I actually have both of these. Instead of cargo hold optimization things, I actually have hyperspatial velocity optimizers, which pushes you to almost 10 AU a second roughly. So now you're really flying through a lot of systems. And that's because I use that ship to haul relatively inexpensive, or I should say very small stuff that's really expensive. So that's why I do that. And that's pretty much it, guys. I realized this video actually went pretty long. I wanted to keep it shorter than my other one, but just because we're going through two pretty important ships when it comes to hauling, and I've been there before where I was using the Blockade runner as well as the deep space transport. I have honestly lost billions when it comes in collateral just from getting ganked, just not using the ship fits correctly, things like that, smart bombs. And so I just want to make sure I present all that information to you guys that is available that I have, because I've done hours of research. I want to make sure everything is squared away. But if you guys do like my fits, let me know down below. If you guys do have some suggestions or ways that you fit your Amarrian industrial ships, I would love to hear that down in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and don't forget to fly safe.